Hey, you want to hear some good news? Recent trends over the last few years have resulted in a reduction of low-income countries, meaning countries in which the yearly gross national income is less than $1,000 per person. These went from 63 countries in 2000 to around 30 today. However, this isn't to say that all is well. Despite the dramatic reduction in global poverty, the poorest of the poor seem to be left behind. In short, there is great general progress in lifting people out of poverty, but the poverty floor remains low, with many people living in extreme poverty still. You can't talk about poverty reduction without addressing the two elephants in the room. China has been extremely successful at reducing poverty and increasing economic growth, but Africa is still lagging in both regards. Here, let me show you. This graph shows just how significantly China and Sub-Saharan Africa differ in regards to poverty reduction over the last 3 decades. As you can see, China started off with even greater poverty levels than Africa, but was impressively quick at reducing those levels, whereas Sub-Saharan Africa appeared to be stuck. But how did China do this? Well, the short answer is through significant economic growth and reforms. To help understand, let's quickly travel to China and see how. First off, you can't have such levels of poverty reduction without the necessary economic growth. And China's economy grew at an average of 9.4% between 1979 and 2003. As economic growth increased, China implemented the following reforms to fight poverty. The first reform, called the Rural Reform, was enacted to help boost rural economic growth. It did this through institutional reforms in rural production, distribution systems, and procurement prices. China's agricultural sector did more to reduce poverty than its other sectors. The second reform, the National Targeted Poverty Reduction Programs, paid special attention to minority and border regions in rural China. It helped by subsidizing loans for both household and large enterprises in industry and agriculture. By then, China's progress in poverty reduction started to slow down and even reversed in some years due to rural economic stagnation. But have no fear, the 8-7 plan is here. Hoping to lift China's remaining 80 million poor above the poverty line, this reform aimed at intensifying poverty reduction policies. It did this by creating several specific objectives, which include assisting poor households with land improvement and increasing cash crop and livestock production. It also improved access to employment opportunities outside of the farm and provided towns with road access, electricity, and drinking water. Furthermore, it offered universal primary education and healthcare. This could be achieved by involving support from all government ministries, agencies, provinces, and municipalities, as well as involving international organizations. The result was steady progress in human capital development. By 2001, adult literacy had risen to 85%, and primary school enrollment rates were at 99%. Lastly, the poverty reduction strategy in the New Century Reform targeted human capital and social development in the villages more than urban areas. China is now the second largest economy in the world and continues to progress in regards to poverty reduction as it shifts focus to inequality. Now let's travel to Africa and see where it stands. Despite reducing poverty by 14% between 1990 and 2012, this progress was unfortunately undermined by its dramatic increase of population. Taking population growth into account, there are now about 100 million more people in poverty than in 1990. In order to continue to progress, Africa could use some lessons from China's success. Among other issues impeding growth, land productivity in Africa has barely increased since 1961. One possible explanation might be that compared to China, Africa has a low population density, thereby having a large undeveloped potential in sectors such as agriculture and manufacturing. Generally, social services like education, healthcare, sanitation, clean water, and roads are mostly non-existent. In some places, there is even a lack of government, which leads to informal types of work such as freelance banditry and straight-up pillaging. Additionally, incomes, assets, and access to essential services are unequally distributed. The World Bank admits that half of the completed development projects and programs aimed at poverty reduction in Africa have failed. Perhaps, Africa's biggest obstacle lies in its state capacity, or lack thereof, as well as corruption. So why doesn't Africa just do what China did? First of all, Africa faces some constraints that China did not. Africa's past policy failures are due to their generally poor rural infrastructure and weak public support, whereas China had already a comparatively well-developed agricultural infrastructure. The low population density in Africa makes it more difficult and expensive to supply basic infrastructure such as roads. A fundamental difference is that China has a long history and strong internal economic, social, and political cohesion. In contrast, Africa consists of 48 recently independent countries with low cohesion within and across countries. Therefore, it has poor internal integration. China, on the other hand, enjoyed the advantage of being a large but relatively homogeneous country. So which policies should Africa implement? First, building the necessary state capacity in Africa will ensure that future policies will more likely have the desired effects. With improved state capacity, Africa can go on to pursue the following 6 policies, which were identified by the World Bank as the most effective and proven to reduce poverty and inequality globally. Countries that have been successful in creating growth and reducing poverty don't necessarily inherit the capacities and bureaucracies needed for development. These are built over time, with experience and constant efforts. Most countries, including China, have been in the process of state building for centuries. Africa's independence from colonialism was only about half a century ago. For Africa, there is a long road ahead, but with constant efforts, the process will deliver fast short-term and slower long-term results. As a Chinese proverb says, the journey of 1,000 miles begins with a single step.